I woke up to the soft rustle of sheets and a low, sleepy hum coming from the other side of the room. For a moment, I couldn't quite place where I was. The scent of cedarwood and something warm and familiar lingered in the air, pulling me from the haze of sleep. Then it hit me. I was at the cabin, sharing a room with Ethan. It's funny how being away from the city changes everything. Back home, our routine is predictable. Early morning runs, late night takeout, casual hangouts where we talk about everything and nothing. But here, in this small, secluded cabin, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the morning light slipped through the curtains, painting golden patterns across the wooden floor. Or maybe it was just the way Ethan's laugh seemed softer, more relaxed in this quiet place. Ethan and I have been friends for years, ever since college, when he accidentally spilled coffee on my laptop during an early morning class. He apologized, profusely, offered to replace it, and before I knew it, we were sharing notes, late-night study sessions, and more inside jokes than I could count. Our friendship just clicked. He became my constant, the guy who always had my back, who'd show up at my door with pizza when life got too heavy. But lately, things felt different. Maybe it was the way he looked at me during our last movie night, his eyes lingering a little too long. Or the way his hand brushed mine when we reached for the last slice, neither of us pulling away. I'd been trying to ignore it, telling myself I was just imagining things, that it was just Ethan being Ethan, affectionate and easygoing. Still, lying here, hearing the familiar sound of his breathing, I couldn't deny the flutter in my chest. I knew this trip would be different, a chance to escape the chaos of everyday life. I just hadn't expected it to make me question everything. The bed creaked softly as Ethan shifted, his face turning toward me, still half asleep. I couldn't help but smile. There was something about this place, about being away from the noise and routine. That made me want to be honest, to say what I'd been holding back for too long. But that was the problem, wasn't it? I had no idea if Ethan felt the same, and if he didn't, well, I wasn't sure I could handle losing him. Ethan murmured something under his breath, his face burying into the pillow. I let out a quiet breath, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this trip would give me the courage to find out the truth. I padded quietly into the kitchen, the chill of the cabin's wooden floor sending a shiver up my spine. Ethan was already there, leaning against the counter with a mug of coffee in his hands, his hair sticking up in every direction. He glanced up as I entered, a grin spreading across his face. "Morning, Sleeping Beauty," he teased, lifting his mug in a mock toast. I rolled my eyes, heading straight for the coffee pot. "You couldn't have at least waited to start the pot? I'm beginning to think you only bring me out here for the free." "Labor," Ethan chuckled, the sound warm and familiar. "Hey, I gotta get something out of this friendship. If it's you making me coffee, then I'd say I'm getting a pretty good deal." I snorted, pouring myself a cup. "Right, because you're practically helpless without me," I shot back, taking a long sip. The coffee was strong, just the way I liked. Ethan had remembered. He always did. It was easy with him, always had been. We met in college, bonded over a mutual dislike for our statistics professor and a shared love of bad 80s movies. What started as late-night study sessions turned into weekend road trips, game nights that lasted until dawn, and eventually, this. Escaping to his family's old cabin for the weekend whenever life got too loud. Ethan pushed away from the counter, stretching his arms above his head with a groan. His shirt lifted slightly, exposing a strip of skin just above his waistband. I caught myself staring and quickly looked away, focusing hard on my mug. "So," he began, voice still heavy with sleep. "You ready for the hike today?" I smirked. "You? Mean, am I ready to watch you pretend you're in better shape than you actually are?" His eyes narrowed playfully. "I'll have you know, I've been hitting the gym at least twice a week. I'm basically a machine now." "A machine, huh?" Is that what we're calling skipping leg day? Ethan let out a bark of laughter. Okay, now I'm definitely leaving you behind on the trail. Hope you brought a flare gun. We fell into easy conversation, the kind that comes naturally when you've known someone for years. I knew how he took his coffee, black with too much sugar. He knew I couldn't function without breakfast, so he'd already set out bread and jam on the counter. It was just us. The rhythm of it was seamless. I don't know when it happened, but at some point, the easy familiarity started to feel different. It was in the way I found myself lingering on his laugh a bit too long, or how I'd noticed the flecks of gold in his eyes when he was telling one of his ridiculous stories. I never thought much of it, just brushed it off as the comfort of knowing someone so well. But here, isolated in the woods with only the crackling of the fireplace and the wind whispering through the trees, it felt sharper, harder to ignore. We packed our gear after breakfast, Ethan cramming snacks and water bottles into his old, beaten-up backpack. "You ready to lose?" he asked, slinging it over his shoulder. "Is that your way of admitting I'm faster?" I shot back, shouldering my own pack. He grinned, tapping his chest. "Heart of a champion, man. You're going down." "Right. Heart of a champion. Lungs of a chain smoker," I quipped, and he laughed, nudging me with his shoulder as we stepped out onto the porch. The air was brisk, the scent of pine sharp and clear. I pulled my jacket tighter as Ethan locked the cabin door. "You know," he said, turning to me with that familiar glint of mischief in his eyes, "the forecast called for rain tonight. Hope you're ready to rough it if we get stuck out there." I raised an eyebrow. "Rough it? We're hiking, not scaling Everest. I'm sure we'll manage." He shrugged, flashing me that lopsided grin. "Just saying, might get cozy." My heart did a little flip at the suggestion, but I forced a laugh. "Keep dreaming." He shot me a look I couldn't quite decipher before turning and heading down the trail. I watched him go, the back of his jacket swaying with each step, and felt that familiar tug in my chest, the one I'd been trying so hard to ignore. I knew things would be different this weekend. I just didn't realize how much. The trail snaked through towering pines and winding paths, the canopy above thick enough to cast us in dappled shade. Ethan was a few paces ahead, his laughter echoing back at me as he narrated some story about a disastrous first date I'd heard a dozen times, but still managed to laugh at. And then she said, "I thought you meant paragliding, not parasailing." And I swear, I have never seen someone turn that shade of green so fast, he finished, glancing back to see if I was keeping up. "You do have a habit of almost killing your dates," I called back, stepping over a root that jutted from the earth. He smirked, slowing his pace to fall in step beside me. I guess I'm just waiting for someone sturdy enough to survive it. My breath hitched, just slightly, just enough for me to notice and curse myself for it. I kept my eyes trained on the path ahead, hoping he didn't catch it. "Good luck with, that," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, the distant chirping of birds and the crunch of leaves beneath our boots filling the space. It wasn't until the sky began to shift, clouds rolling, in heavy and gray, that Ethan paused and turned back to me. Did you bring the rain gear?" he asked, squinting up at the thickening clouds. I pulled off my backpack, rummaging through the mess of water bottles and granola bars before shaking my head. "You said it wasn't supposed to start until tonight," I replied, trying not to sound accusatory. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. I might have been a bit optimistic. I stared at him, then at the sky, and groaned. "We're like 2 hours from the cabin, Ethan." Before he could respond, the sky opened up. A curtain of rain fell in thick, icy drops, soaking us within seconds. Ethan cursed under his breath, yanking his jacket hood over his head. I followed suit, pulling mine tight as water seeped through the fabric. "There's a clearing up ahead," he shouted over the rain, his voice muffled by the downpour. "I think there's an old ranger cabin. It's closer than going back." I didn't bother arguing. With the rain coming down harder by the second, the path grew slick and uneven. We trudged through it, shoulders hunched against the cold. Ethan led the way, glancing back occasionally to make sure I was still behind him. When we finally reached the clearing, the ranger cabin came into view, small, weather-beaten, but standing. Ethan jogged up to the door, testing the handle before giving me a triumphant grin. "Unlocked. Guess today's our lucky day." I rolled my eyes, stepping inside and shaking the rain from my jacket. The interior was sparse, just a wooden bench, a small stove, and a cot shoved against the wall. Dust clung to every surface, but it was dry. That was enough. Ethan closed the door behind him, leaning back against it with a breathless chuckle. "Well, not exactly the 5-star experience I promised," he said, shaking out his soaked hair. "Yeah, you really know how to treat a guy," I replied, peeling off my drenched jacket and hanging it on the back of the bench. He laughed, the sound warm and familiar, before his eyes drifted to the cot in the corner. "I call dibs," he announced, striding over and flopping down with a dramatic sigh. I raised an eyebrow. "What am I supposed to do? Sleep on the floor?" He propped himself up on one elbow, a grin spreading across his face. "Guess we're sharing, unless you want to fight me for it." My heart thumped hard in my chest. I forced a laugh. "I'd win, you know." "Keep telling yourself that," he replied, patting the space beside him. "Come on, I don't bite." I hesitated, my eyes flicking from the tiny cot to him and back again. The space was barely wide enough for one person, let alone two, but the rain wasn't letting up, and the floor looked about as inviting as a bed of nails. "Fine," I said, pretending my voice wasn't shaking just a little. I kicked off my boots and crossed the room, sitting on the edge of the cot with as much space between us as I could manage. Ethan snorted. "What? Am I contagious?" I shoved him, lightly, and he laughed, the movement shifting the mattress beneath us. "You're insufferable," I muttered. But I didn't move away. For a while we just lay there, him on his back, me on my side, the silence punctuated by the steady rhythm of rain against the window pane. His arm was close enough to touch, his breathing slow and even. I could feel the warmth of him, inches away, and it was maddening. "Hey," he said suddenly, his voice softer now. "You warm enough?" I swallowed hard, nodding. "Yeah. You?" He turned, his head to look at me, his eyes meeting mine in the dim light. "I'm good," he said, his voice dropping just a bit. His gaze lingered, just a heartbeat too long, before he turned back to the ceiling. The rain hammered on, and I lay there, every breath feeling like a confession I wasn't ready to make. But still, I didn't move away, and neither did he. The rain hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown heavier, crashing against the windows of the tiny ranger cabin like waves against rock. It was almost dark now, shadows stretching long and heavy across the room, interrupted only by the flickering light of the single lantern Ethan had found tucked away in a cabinet. We were still lying on the cot, bodies angled awkwardly to fit, but neither of us moved. It was warmer that way, I told myself. Practical, nothing more. But with every breath, I could feel the heat of his arm beside mine, the soft rise and fall of his chest so close that I had to fight the urge to shift closer. He was staring at the ceiling, his hands tucked behind his head, a contemplative look on his face. I wanted to ask him what he was thinking, but the question stuck in my throat. It was too dangerous. "Kind of peaceful out here," he murmured finally, his voice breaking. The silence. "Yeah," I replied, barely above a whisper. "It is." He turned his head to look at me, his eyes shadowed in the dim light. "You ever think about just not going back?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Not going back? Like staying out here forever?" He shrugged, his gaze drifting back up. "Not here, necessarily. Just somewhere else, somewhere quieter. where it's just easy. I didn't know what to say to that. The weight of his words pressed against my chest, heavy and hopeful. "You're not the quiet type," I joked, trying to cut the tension. "I'm pretty sure you'd last 2 weeks before you missed city life." He laughed, the sound soft and genuine. "You're probably right," he said. "But I don't know. Sometimes it feels like things could be different, you know. Easier." My mouth went dry. "Different how?" He hesitated, the pause stretching long and taut between us. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost fragile. Like, not pretending all the time. I didn't breathe, didn't move. His words hung in the air, lingering like mist, and I felt something crack open in my chest. "Pretending?" I echoed, my voice barely more than a whisper. He turned back to me, eyes searching mine. For a moment, there was nothing but the rain and the sound of our breathing, his eyes reflecting 1,000 things unsaid. Then he let out a shaky breath, his hand running through his hair. "I'm so damn tired of pretending," he said, the words spilling out like he'd been holding them back for years. My heart was pounding, the sound of it rushing in my ears. "Pretending what?" I asked, voice trembling. He swallowed, his gaze dropping to the space between us. "That I don't feel this," he said quietly. "That I don't look at you and want more. That I'm fine with just being your friend when all I want to do is—" He stopped, jaw clenched, like the words had finally failed him. My breath hitched, and I couldn't move. I couldn't even think. He was staring down at his hands now, his shoulders tense, like he was bracing for impact. "Forget it," he said suddenly, shaking his head. I shouldn't have said that. But I couldn't let it go. Not now. I reached out before I could stop myself, my hand covering his. He froze, eyes snapping up to meet mine. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't take it back." The silence stretched, thick and fragile. His eyes searched mine, desperate and uncertain. "What are you saying?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, my heart hammering in my chest. "That you're not the only one who's tired of pretending," I admitted, the words spilling out before I could second-guess them. I've been trying to ignore it for so long, telling myself that I'm just reading into things. But I'm not, am I?" He shook his head slowly, his eyes shining with something raw and unguarded. "No," he breathed. "You're not." I felt the room spin slightly, the reality of it crashing down on me. I looked down at our hands, his warm beneath mine, his thumb brushing tentatively across my knuckles. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He let out a shaky laugh. "And risk losing you? Are you kidding?" My throat tightened. "You couldn't lose me," I said firmly, the truth of it settling deep in my bones. "Not ever." Ethan's eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw it, unhidden and unguarded. He squeezed my hand, and I felt his thumb trace slow, deliberate circles against my skin. "I'm going to do something really stupid if you don't stop me," he said, his voice unsteady. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. "What if I don't want to stop you?" That was all it took. He moved forward slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his touch gentle and warm, eyes flickering over mine like he was memorizing every detail. When his lips finally brushed against mine, it was soft, tentative, almost like a question. I answered without hesitation, leaning into him, my hands finding their way to his shoulders. He made a soft sound, something between a sigh and a gasp, and deepened the kiss, his hand slipping to the back of my neck, holding me closer. I could feel everything. The warmth of his breath, the steady beat of his heart, the way his fingers tangled in my hair. It was gentle but certain, a slow unraveling of everything we'd been holding back. When we finally pulled away, his forehead rested against mine, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. He chuckled, his voice a little breathless. "That was overdue," he murmured, his thumb brushing against my cheek. I smiled, heart still hammering in my chest. "Yeah," I replied softly. "Just a bit." Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside, that tiny cabin, everything felt clear for the first time. The rain hadn't let up, but neither of us seemed to mind. We stayed tangled together on that narrow cot, his arm slung over my waist, my head resting against his shoulder. I could hear his heartbeat, steady and unhurried, like everything we'd just done was the most natural thing in the world. Ethan's fingers traced lazy patterns along my back, sending tiny shivers down my spine. He was quiet, his gaze fixed on the ceiling, but his hand never stopped moving. I didn't want him to stop. Ever. "You know," he began, voice low and edged with a smile, "I really thought you were going to punch me." I let out a laugh, the sound muffled against his chest. "What? Why would I punch you?" He glanced down, his eyes sparkling with something like disbelief. "I don't know, man. I couldn't tell if I was reading things wrong. I've been thinking it for so long, and I kept telling myself I was imagining it." I lifted my head, catching his gaze. "You weren't," I said, voice steady. "I was just trying really hard not to be obvious." He raised an eyebrow, his hand pausing mid-circle on my back. "You weren't obvious?" He snorted, shaking his head. "Dude, you blush every time I call you out on your stupid jokes." I opened my mouth to protest but paused, replaying the moments in my head. He wasn't wrong. "Okay, maybe a little," I admitted, cheeks warming. Ethan's grin widened. "I thought it was just because you were embarrassed by how bad your comebacks were," he teased. I shoved him lightly, and he laughed, pulling me back against him before I could move too far away. His arms wrapped around me, firm and secure, like he'd been waiting to do it for years. Maybe he had. "So, what now?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could second-guess it. It was stupid, too real for the moment, but I needed to know. I needed to hear him say it. He went quiet for a moment, his fingers absent-mindedly playing with the hem of my shirt. "I don't know," he said finally, voice thoughtful, "but I want to find out." My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. "You're not worried?" His eyes flickered back to mine, something soft and sure settling there. "Of course I'm worried," he said plainly. "But I'm more worried about going back to pretending. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to keep looking at you and biting my tongue." His words wrapped around me, sinking deep. I couldn't help the smile that broke out across my face. "You were biting your tongue?" He rolled his eyes, chuckling. "Shut up." I laughed, nudging his shoulder. "No, seriously." "You, Mr. No Filter?" Ethan leaned back against the cot, dragging me with him. "You'd be surprised," he said, voice dipping lower. His eyes settled on mine, gaze unflinching. There's a lot I wanted to say, a lot I want to do too. My breath caught, and his grin softened into something gentler. His hand came up, brushing a stray piece of hair from my forehead, fingers lingering against my skin. "I want to figure this out," he said quietly. "With you, if you want to." There wasn't an ounce of hesitation in my reply. "I do," I said, voice steady. "I really do." His smile broke wide, and for a moment, I saw the boy I'd met in college, the one who'd crashed into my life with terrible jokes and too much confidence. But now there was something deeper, something real, So, he said, his fingers tracing along my arm. I guess that means I'm stuck with you, huh? I smirked. You saying you can't handle it? He laughed, the sound vibrating through me. Oh, I can handle it, he replied, his voice dropping just enough to make my heart stutter. His gaze softened, hand cupping the back of my neck. I've been waiting to handle it. I barely had time to breathe before his lips were on mine again, slow and sure, like he was savoring every second. I kissed him back, sinking into it, letting the rain outside and the chill of the room fade into nothing. When we finally broke apart, his forehead rested against mine, breath mingling in the space between us. Guess we're sharing this cot tonight, he murmured, voice thick with humor. I chuckled, my fingers curling into his shirt. Guess so. Hope you don't mind me hogging all the blankets, he added with a grin. I laughed, shoving him lightly. You do that, and I'm pushing you off this thing. He raised an eyebrow, eyes glinting. I'd like to see you try. We fell back into the cot, the rain still pouring outside, but it didn't matter. For the first time, everything felt right, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, and for once I wasn't afraid to stay there. Morning crept in slowly, the first light of dawn spilling through the narrow window of the ranger cabin, casting everything in soft hues of gold. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the earth damp and glistening. Drops of water clung to leaves, catching the sunlight like tiny jewels. I woke up with Ethan's arm draped over me, his breath soft and steady against my shoulder. For a moment, I just lay there, letting the reality of it sink in. His fingers were curled loosely around my hand, our legs tangled together in the cramped space of the cot, and it felt right. Like this was how it was always supposed to be. I shifted slightly, and he stirred, blinking awake with a slow, lazy grin that made my heart stumble over itself. Morning, he mumbled, voice thick with sleep. Morning, I replied, trying and failing not to smile. He stretched, his arm tightening around me briefly before he pulled back to rub his eyes. Think the rain finally gave up, he said, glancing toward the window. I followed his gaze, nodding. Guess we can head back now. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked back at me, his expression softening. We could, he said slowly. Or, we could hang out a bit longer. You know, just us. My heart thumped, the implication of his words settling between us. I raised an eyebrow, my voice teasing. You trying to steal me away from civilization now? He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Maybe. I'm just saying, I don't really feel like going back to pretending. I swallowed, my chest tightening, with something warm and electric. Me neither, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes searched mine, serious and unguarded. So, we won't, he said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And maybe it was. I nodded, feeling the weight of it settle in my bones. We won't, I repeated, the words steady and sure. Ethan's smile grew, his fingers intertwining with mine, thumb brushing over my knuckles in a slow, deliberate motion. Good, he murmured, his voice dipping lower. I'm holding you to that, you know. I squeezed his hand, grinning. Guess you're stuck with me then. Not the worst thing, he replied, leaning back against the cot with a sigh. We stayed like that for a while, hands clasped, the silence between us comfortable and unhurried. Finally, he cleared his throat, his tone shifting to something more playful. So, you think you're ready to face the real world after this? I mean, we did just survive a night on the world's smallest cot, I chuckled, glancing around the tiny cabin. Barely, I shot back. I'm pretty sure I lost feeling in my arm for half the night. Ethan snorted, nudging me with his shoulder. Yeah, well, I don't remember you complaining. I met his gaze, holding it. No, I said quietly. I didn't. His expression softened, and for a moment, the teasing faded. He reached up, brushing a thumb over my cheek. I don't want to go back to how things were, he murmured. Me neither, I replied, my voice steady. A silence settled between us, not heavy this time, but full, like we were standing on the edge of something big, something important. And this time, I wasn't afraid to step forward. I tightened my grip on his hand, my eyes never leaving his. So, what do you say we get out of here? I asked, my voice light but full of meaning. We'll figure it out, together. Ethan's smile was slow and genuine, stretching wide across his face. Yeah, he said, nodding. Together. We didn't move right away. We stayed there for a moment longer, hands clasped, hearts steady. Outside, the world was waking up, clean, and new after the storm. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just watching it from the outside. I was part of it. Part of something real. I squeezed his hand one last time, and he returned the gesture. A silent promise passing between us, no more pretending, no more holding back, just us, and it was enough.